The Mafia boss went to church and saw his maid begging for help. What he did next shocked everyone. Before we dive into the story, tell me where in the world you're watching from, and if this story steals your heart, please hit subscribe. The scent of old incense, damp stone, and the faint, sweet decay of lilies permeated the air of St. Michael's. Luca Valent sat in his family's designated pew, a bulwark of dark oak that had absorbed the prayers and petitions of 3 generations of Valent leaders before him. He was not a man given to prayer, not in the traditional sense. His presence here was a different kind of offering, a performance of stability, a nod to the old traditions that kept the community placid, and his syndicate's less savory operations veiled behind a veneer of Catholic piety. He wore a charcoal suit tailored so precisely it seemed molded to his tall frame, the only break in its severe lines being the tarnished silver rosary wrapped around his right wrist, worn like a bracelet, the cross resting against his pulse. His dark hair was undercut, sharp and modern, contrasting with the ancient gold-leaf rendering of the suffering Christ above the altar. He listened to the familiar cadence of the Sunday Mass, his pale gray eyes calm and observant, sweeping over the congregation not with reverence, but with the assessing gaze of a CEO reviewing his assets. His attention snagged on a figure kneeling near the front, separate from the main pews, closer to the rail. Her head was bowed, a modest cream cardigan pulled tight over a simple dress. He recognized the wavy red hair, captured in its usual practical braid down her back. It was Anna Duarte, his maid. She was a quiet presence in his mansion, efficient, unobtrusive, and until this moment utterly unremarkable. She was meant to be invisible, a pair of ink-smudged fingers that replaced his files, refilled his coffee, and vanished. But here, in the house of God, she was vibrating with a desperation that was loud in the sacred quiet. She was not praying, she was trembling, her small shoulders shaking with repressed sobs. Luca's gaze narrowed. This was a deviation from the expected, a disruption in the quiet order of his world, and he disliked disruptions. When the Mass concluded and the organ began its recessional, the parishioners shuffled out, their quiet Sunday chatter filling the nave. Anna did not move. She waited until the crowd thinned, until only the devout and the desperate remained, and then she rose, moving like a ghost toward the side chapel of the Virgin. Father Michael, his vestments worn from decades of service, met her there, his face etched with concern. Luca remained in his pew, cloaked in shadow, a silent observer. The stone acoustics of the old church were unforgiving. Her voice, though barely a whisper, carried to him, fragmented and sharp with terror. "My brother, Leo, he didn't know, Father, please, they said they would hurt him." She was sobbing openly now, clutching the priest's robes. "He's just a boy, this man, this collector, his name is Mark." The name struck Luca with the cold precision of a bullet. Marco, a low-level collector in the Valent organization. A man with a serpent tattoo snaking up his neck and a predatory smirk, known for his ambition and his cruelty. A man who ultimately answered to him. Luca realized with a surge of cold anger that his maid, a woman who lived under his own roof, was begging a priest for protection from his own syndicate. The sheer, sloppy insolence of it ignited a possessive fire in his chest. This was not compassion, it was offense. Marco had brought this mess, this raw, weeping terror, into Luca's sanctuary, and had dared to threaten someone who, by sheer proximity, belonged to him. The invisible thread connecting his maid to his business had just become a steel cable. He rose from the pew. The sound of his leather-soled shoes on the stone floor was the only sound in the cavernous space. Anna and the priest both turned, their conversation freezing. Anna's face, pale and tear-streaked, registered shock, then a profound, soul-deep terror as she recognized her employer. To her, he was likely just a demanding, distant boss. She could not possibly know that the man she feared, Marco, was merely a dog on Luca's leash. Father Michael, however, knew exactly who Luca Valent was. The priest's gaze hardened with a practiced weariness. "Mr. Valent," the priest began, stepping slightly in front of Anna, a shepherd protecting his flock. "This is a private matter." Luca did not stop until he was standing before them, towering over them both in the small, candle-lit chapel. He ignored the priest, his pale gray eyes fixed on Anna. He saw her ink-smudged fingers, the same ones he saw every morning, twisting together. He saw the protective gaze she always had when she spoke of her brother, now shattered into panic. He reached into his pocket, his movements economical and deliberate. He withdrew a single, impossibly heavy card of matte black metal and laid it on the edge of the altar, the sound a sharp, definitive click. Then he slowly unwound the silver rosary from his wrist. He placed it next to the card. The small gesture seemed to suck all the air from the chapel. He finally looked at Father Michael. "Her debt is mine," he stated. His voice was quiet, devoid of emotion, yet it echoed with the absolute authority of a king. The priest's mouth opened, but Luca cut him off, turning his gaze back to Anna, whose eyes were wide, fixed on his face. "Her protection also mine." He did not wait for a response. He did not ask for details. The declaration was made, a vow spoken not to God but to himself. He took Anna by the upper arm. His grip was not rough, but it was inescapable, a manacle of intent. She flinched but did not resist, too stunned to do anything but obey. He nodded once, a curt dismissal, to the stunned priest. He pulled Anna from the chapel, through the nave, and out the massive oak doors into the gray, rain-slicked afternoon. The transition from the sacred quiet to the city's roar was jarring. His driver, seeing him, immediately exited the black sedan and opened the rear door. Luca guided Anna inside, his hand still on her arm, a brand of ownership. He slid in beside her, the smell of her rain-damp cardigan filling the small space. "Take Miss Duart to the mansion," he ordered the driver. He did not look at her. He looked straight ahead, his sharp jawline tight. "Then return for me. I have a meeting at the tower." He turned his head then, his gray eyes meeting hers. She looked shattered. "Do not leave the house," he commanded. "I will handle Mr. Marco, and I will handle your brother's debt." Valent Tower was a spear of glass and steel piercing the belly of the downtown skyline, a monument to the legitimate face of Luca's empire. His penthouse office was a minimalist expanse of chrome and black marble, the city sprawling below him like a map of his dominion. The ancient stone of St. Michael's felt a world away. Within an hour of leaving the church, Marco was brought to him. The collector shuffled into the office, his broad shoulders tense in his worn leather jacket, the serpent tattoo at his neck seeming to writhe under the harsh track lighting. He was flanked by two of Luca's personal guards, men who wore the same tailored suits as their boss, their lethal presence a silent promise. Marco was trying to project confidence, a predatory smirk fixed on his face, but his eyes darted nervously, unused to being summoned to the throne room. He clearly assumed this was about a missed payment, a procedural error, not a fundamental transgression. Luca remained seated behind his massive, empty desk. He steepled his fingers, the faint scar at the edge of his lip pulling taut. "Marco," he said, his voice a low, calm murmur that was infinitely more terrifying than a shout. "You have been collecting from a young man named Leo Duart." It was not a question. Marco's smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of confusion, then recognition. "Yeah, boss, kid's a deadbeat. Racked up a big vig on a small loan. He's late." "I was just gonna go squeeze him, teach him a lesson." Luca's gaze remained flat, his pale gray eyes like chips of ice. "You were not going to do anything," he corrected him softly. "Because as of 1 hour ago, that debt and the boy and his sister, Anna Duart, belong to me." The color drained from Marco's face. He knew Anna's name. He must have seen her, perhaps even used her as leverage against her brother. The realization of who he had been threatening, a woman living under the Valent roof, hit him with the force of a physical blow. "Boss, I didn't know. I swear to God, I had no idea she was yours." "Is not mine," Luca replied, the distinction sharp. "She is under mine. You brought your street-level filth to my doorstep. You terrified a member of my household. You did this sloppy, loud business in my own territory, forcing me to clean it up in the house of God." He leaned forward, the calm finally breaking, revealing the cold fury beneath. "This is the full amount of the principal," he said, sliding a thick envelope across the desk. "You will receive no interest. You will consider the debt paid. You will burn the boys' ledger. You will forget the names Anna and Leo Duart. And if I ever hear that you have looked in their direction, spoken their names, or even thought about them, the serpent on your neck will be the last thing that chokes you. Am I clear?" Marco, sweating profusely, could only nod. "Am I clear?" Luca repeated, his voice dropping further. "Crystal, boss, crystal." Luca leaned back, his composure restored. "Get him out of my sight." The guards grabbed Marco by the arms and dragged him, unresisting, from the office. Luca turned his chair to face the window. Watching the rain lash against the glass, his mind already shifting from the enforcer to the maid. He returned to the mansion late, the house silent and dark. He bypassed his own wing, taking the narrow servant stairs to the attic. He found her room at the end of the hall. The door was ajar, a single weak lamp illuminating the small, clean space. He pushed the door open without knocking. Anna was on her knees, a small, worn suitcase open on the floor. She was folding her modest clothes, the same cream cardigan on top. She froze, her hand in the air, her face pale and stained with old tears. The sight of him, filling the doorway of her tiny room, sent a fresh wave of fear through her. "Mr. Valent," she whispered, scrambling to her feet. I was just packing. I'll be gone in the morning. I'm so sorry, sir. I never meant to bring my trouble to you. I would never." He held up a hand, and she fell silent. He stepped inside, his presence seeming to shrink the already small room to the size of a closet. It was sparse, but neat. A stack of second-hand textbooks for her night classes sat on a small desk. Her fingers, he knew, would be smudged with ink. His gaze softened, just a fraction. This tiny, brave, terrified woman had been trying to hold her world together with library books and thrifted cardigans, and had run afoul of his wolves. "You are not leaving," he said. It was a command, not a reassurance. She looked at him, confused, her fear warring with exhaustion. "But sir, I can't stay. After what you did, what I caused." He shook his head, moving closer. "You caused nothing. An animal in my employ got off his leash. It has been handled." He stopped a few feet from her, the air charged with the impossible gulf between their lives. "The debt is paid. Marco will not bother you or your brother again. You are safe." Anna stared at him, trying to process his words. Safe. It was a word she had not associated with her life for a very long time. "Why?" she finally whispered, the question torn from her. "Why would you do that, at the church in front of everyone? You could have just fired me." Luca looked at her, truly looked at her, not as a functionary in his home, but as the woman who had wept at the altar. "I do not tolerate threats to my household," he said simply, as if explaining a balance sheet. "And I do not abide disrespect in my territory. You live under my roof. You are therefore my responsibility." He saw the ink stains on her fingers, dark against her pale skin. "Unpack your bag, Anna. You are not going anywhere." He left her then, pulling the door gently closed, leaving her in the sudden, suffocating silence. He descended the stairs, the image of her small, trembling form in that attic room imprinted in his mind. He was a man who dealt in debts and leverage, and he had just willingly taken on a debt that had no monetary value, driven by an impulse he did not yet understand. The repercussions of Luca's public declaration at St. Michael's and his private reprimand of Marco echoed through both of his worlds. In the sterile, glass-walled boardroom of Valent Tower, the mood was tense. Luca was in the final stages of negotiating a massive legitimate acquisition, a merger that would solidify the Valent name as a force in global logistics, further washing the family's money clean. But his partners and the capos who sat on his board disguised as security consultants were uneasy. "Luca," his uncle Antonio said, his voice a gravelly rumble, "this deal requires finesse. Your focus seems divided. We are hearing whispers. This business with the maid. This collector, Marco, you embarrassed him, and for what? A servant." Luca's pale gray eyes swept the table, his calm a frigid counterpoint to their anxiety. "My focus," he stated, his voice precise, "is exactly where it needs to be. The deal will close. My household affairs are my own. Marco was a rabid dog, and I put him back on his chain. It was a message to everyone else. My property is not to be touched. Let us return to the quarterly projections." He dismantled their concerns with cold, sharp logic, his CEO persona firmly in place, but the message was clear. The boss's authority was absolute, in the boardroom and on the street. For Anna, the mansion had become a different kind of prison. It was safer, yet more isolating. The other staff, who had once been friendly, now treated her with a mixture of fear and suspicion. She was no longer one of them. She was the boss. Something. They whispered when she passed, their eyes following her. She kept to her duties, her head down, but the protective bubble Luca had placed around her was as visible as a cage. Her brother Leo was terrified into silence, refusing to leave their small apartment, convinced a different monster would come for him. Anna's only escape was her night classes, a small community college downtown. Luca, true to his word, had arranged for his personal driver to take her and wait for her. She sat in lectures on art history, her fingers smudged with charcoal from a drawing class, the hulking black sedan waiting outside like a sentinel, marking her as separate as his. She needed to understand. The safety he provided felt conditional, a weight she could not bear. She knew he was a powerful man, a CEO who moved in circles she could only imagine. But the man who had laid his rosary on the altar, the man who had faced down Marco, and the man who had gently told her to unpack in her attic room, those three men were at war, and she needed to know which one she was truly indebted to. One evening, after her class, she did not go to the waiting car. She told the driver she needed to go to the church. He protested, his orders to take her straight home, but Anna was firm, a new, quiet strength in her voice. "He will understand," she said. The driver, unnerved by her confidence, relented. He drove her to St. Michael's. The church was dark, empty, the cavernous space lit only by ranks of flickering votive candles. She found him where she knew he would be. He was not praying, but sitting in the front pew, staring at the side chapel where it had all begun. He turned his head as she approached, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You should be at home," he said, his voice low. "It is not safe for you to be out." Anna stopped in the aisle, clutching her backpack to her chest. "I am with your driver," she countered, her voice shaking but resolute. "You are the one who is not safe. The whispers in the house, the men in your boardroom, they think you are soft because of me." Luca rose and moved toward her, stepping into the pool of light from the candles. "They are mistaken," he said simply. "Let them whisper, it clarifies who is loyal and who is not." He stood before her, the difference in their stations, their power, their very lives, a chasm between them. "Why are you here, Anna?" She met his gaze, her own dark and filled with a desperate need for the truth. "I need to know why," she whispered. "Not the reason you gave Marco, not the reason you gave your board, the real reason. You have buried me in your debt, Mr. Valent. I have a right to know what it will cost me." He stared at her for a long moment, the silence of the church pressing in. He saw no guile in her face, only a raw, painful honesty. He found himself answering with a truth he had not admitted even to himself. "When I saw you," he began, his voice rough, "kneeling there, begging Father Michael for help, you were so terrified, and so alone." He looked away, toward the statue of the Virgin. "My mother, before she died, she used to beg my father in the same way, for mercy, for him to be a different man." He never listened. He looked back at Anna, his gray eyes shadowed. "I am my father's son, Anna. I am not a good man, but I would not, stand by and watch that same terror go unanswered. It was a weakness, an impulse." "That was not weakness," she whispered, her heart aching. "That was kindness." He gave a short, harsh laugh. "Do not mistake it for kindness. It was possession. I saw something I wanted to protect, so I claimed it." He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek, a touch so light it was barely there. Anna did not flinch. "And now?" she asked. He took her hand, his thumb tracing the ink stains on her knuckles. He brought her hand to his lips, his mouth brushing her skin, a gesture of profound reverence there at the foot of the altar. It was more intimate than a kiss, more binding than any contract. "And now," he murmured against her skin, "I find myself drawn to the one honest thing in my life. Your faith, your fear, it was real. In my world, nothing is." He did not release her hand. They stood in the candlelight, a mafia boss who dealt in death and a maid who sketched art history, bound by a public declaration and a private confession. The gap between them was still there, but it was no longer a chasm, it was a bridge. Humiliation is a powerful accelerant for ambition. Marco, cast out from Luca's immediate grace and stripped of his profit, became a ghost. He was too afraid to operate openly, but too proud and too stupid to simply disappear. He heard the same whispers as everyone else, that the great Luca Valent, the shark of the boardroom and the heir to the syndicate, had been softened by a red-haired maid. Marco saw an opportunity, not just for revenge, but to prove that Luca's control was slipping. He knew he could not touch Luca. He knew with absolute certainty that touching Anna would mean a death sentence. But the vow of protection, as Marco saw it, had a loophole. Luca had claimed the girl and her debt, but the brother was just the cause. Targeting Leo would be a direct challenge to Luca's authority, a test of his new, perceived weakness. Leo had started to breathe again, cautiously attending his classes, believing himself safe under the Valent umbrella. The belief was his undoing. One evening, walking from the campus library to the bus stop, a dark van pulled up. It was fast, professional, and brutal. Leo was grabbed, a hand clamped over his mouth, and he vanished into the rain-slicked city streets. Anna was waiting for him at their small apartment, the one she still kept for him, a pot of soup on the stove. When he was an hour late, she called his phone. It went straight to voicemail. An hour later, panic, cold and acidic, began to rise in her throat. She called Luca's personal driver, the man who had become her shadow, and begged him to check the campus. He returned an hour later, his face grim. Leo was nowhere. His backpack had been found discarded in an alley near the bus stop. Anna did not weep. She did not panic. A terrifying, cold calm settled over her. She went to the mansion, bypassing the servants' entrance, and walked straight through the front door, tracking rainwater onto the marble floor. She found Luca in his grand 2-story library, a glass of amber liquid in his hand as he reviewed a ledger. He looked up, his eyes narrowing at her disheveled state, her wild eyes. "Anna," he began. "You promised," she said, her voice shaking but hard as steel. She was not the terrified maid from the attic. She was not the pleading girl from the church. She was a woman calling in a marker. "You promised he was safe. You promised protection. And Marco, he has taken my brother." In that instant, the civilized CEO, the quiet confessor from the chapel, evaporated. The man who stood before her was pure, unadulterated predator. The faint scar on his lip went white. He did not raise his voice. He simply placed his glass on the desk with a quiet click and picked up his phone. "He took the boy," Luca said into the phone, his voice flat and lethal. "Find Marco. Find the warehouse he uses on the east side. Shut down every bridge and tunnel. I want him found." He hung up and looked at Anna, his pale gray eyes burning with a cold fire. "This was not a failure of protection, Anna. This was a declaration of war." He shrugged on his suit jacket. "And he will be dealt with." He mobilized his entire organization. This was not a business matter. It was a personal affront, an attack on his honor and his word. Anna refused to be left behind. "I know Leo," she insisted. "I know his friends. I know where he goes. I can help." Luca looked at her, seeing the iron in her spine, and nodded. They worked together from the library, a strange alliance of street knowledge and syndicate power. Anna's desperate calls to Leo's friends, cross-referenced with Luca's network of informants, pinpointed the area. A block of abandoned warehouses near the docks, a place Marco had used before. Luca's men descended, a silent, disciplined army in dark suits. Luca went himself. He left Anna in the car a block away, surrounded by his personal guards. He walked into the dark, cavernous warehouse. The confrontation was brief. Marco, cornered and with nowhere to run, tried to bluster. Luca did not give him the chance. The violence was swift, brutal, and decisive, happening in the shadows, just out of sight of the room where Leo was tied to a chair. The sounds were muffled, sickening, and then silent. Luca emerged from the shadows, adjusting his cuffs. He walked into the room where Leo sat, gagged and trembling. The boy's eyes widened in terror, recognizing the formidable Mr. Valent. Luca calmly pulled a knife from his jacket and sliced the ropes binding Leo's hands and feet, pulling the gag from his mouth. "Your sister is waiting," he said, as if he were merely picking the boy up from school. He brought a pail, shaking Leo back to the car. The moment Anna saw her brother, she burst from the door, her composure breaking, and pulled him into a desperate embrace. Luca watched them, his expression unreadable, before ordering his driver to take them all back to the mansion. He had Leo settled in a secure guest suite, a doctor summoned to check him over, and guards posted outside his door. He then found Anna in the library, standing exactly where he had left her, trembling with the adrenaline and the aftermath. The massive room was silent, the storm outside matching the one that had just passed. He crossed the inlaid floor, stopping directly in front of her. He did not speak. He simply reached out and pulled her against his chest, his arms banding around her, his hand cradling the back of her head. He held her as she finally broke, her sobs muffled against the fine wool of his suit. The gap between them, boss and maid, protector and protected, was gone. In that moment, they were simply a man and a woman, bound by a promise kept in blood. The mansion became a fortress, but also, improbably, a home. Leo, under the watchful eye of Luca's guards and the care of a private physician, recovered quickly from his ordeal. The terror in his eyes was replaced by a kind of awestruck reverence for Luca and a deep, abiding gratitude. He was moved into a permanent, secure guest wing, and Luca's accountants had, with a few quiet phone calls, arranged for his university tuition to be paid in full, his records transferred to a more prestigious, safer campus upstate, where he would be quietly guarded. The debt, in all its forms, was settled. Anna, however, did not return to the attic room. By unspoken agreement, she was given a suite of rooms in the main house, near Luca's own. She still oversaw the running of the household, but the pretense of her being just a maid was gone. She was, in the eyes of the staff and Luca's organization, the signora in all but name. Their evenings fell into a new, charged domesticity. They ate dinner together in the small, private dining room, not the cavernous hall. The silence between them was no longer one of distance, but of contemplation. He would work on his ledgers in the library, and she would sit across from him, reading her art history textbooks, the two of them enveloped in the companionable quiet. She saw the immense burden he carried, the constant vigilance, the weight of his two conflicting worlds. He, in turn, saw the strength that had been hiding beneath her modesty, the intelligence in her eyes when she discussed her classes, the quiet grace with which she had adapted to a life she never asked for. He found himself asking her opinion, first on trivial things, like the choice of wine, and then on more serious matters, like the charitable donations for the church, and even one night the aesthetics of a new building project. He valued her perspective, her inherent goodness, which was a balm to his own compromised soul. Day of the big merger arrived. The deal, which would make Valent Logistics a global name, was set to close. It was the culmination of his father's dream, total, clean legitimacy. But Luca knew, as he stood in his penthouse office overlooking the city, that the events with Marco had changed him. He had been forced to choose, to integrate his two halves. He had used the full, dark power of the syndicate to protect Anna, and in doing so, had solidified his place as its true heir, not just its CEO. He could not, he realized, ascend to this new legitimate throne and hide Anna away like a mistress. He could not offer her a life in the shadows after she had stood with him in the dark. He summoned her to the penthouse that evening. The space was cold, modern, and sterile, a place she had never been. It was his fortress, high above the city, a symbol of his power. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights a galaxy at his feet. "The deal is done," he said as she entered. "The legitimate world is ours. My family is secure for generations." He turned to face her. She wore a simple dark dress, her red hair unbound, falling over her shoulders. She looked beautiful and entirely out of place among the steel and glass. "I can give you anything you want, Anna," he said, his voice quiet. "A new life, for you and Leo. A house, a trust fund, anywhere in the world you want to go. You will be safe and you will be free. You will never have to see this side of my life again." Anna walked slowly toward him, her steps unfaltering. She stopped just before him, close enough to see the exhaustion in his pale gray eyes. "A new life," she repeated. "Safe and free, but it would be alone." He did not reply, his jaw tight. She knew what he was offering, an escape, the out he believed she deserved. "And you?" she asked. "Will you be free?" Luca looked back out at the city. "I am what I am, Anna. I am the man from the boardroom, and I am the man from the warehouse. That will never change." "I know," she whispered. She reached up, her hand trembling slightly, and for the first time she initiated the contact. Her fingers traced the faint white scar at the corner of his lip, a mark of the violence that defined him. "I am not the girl you found weeping at the altar, Luca. You made sure of that. I have seen the man from the boardroom, and I have seen the man from the warehouse, and I am not afraid." He closed his eyes at her touch, a tremor running through him. He had offered her freedom, but she was choosing the cage. He turned, his hands finding her waist, pulling her to him. "To stay with me is not safe," he murmured against her hair. "It will never be." She leaned her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. "But I will not be alone." Later that night, long after the city had quieted, he took her to the church. It was locked, but he had a key. They walked through the silent, cavernous nave, the air thick with the smell of old stone and incense. They stopped at the side chapel, the one now inextricably linked to their story. There, under the serene gaze of the Virgin, he made his own vow. He did not have a ring. Instead, he unwound the tarnished silver rosary from his wrist, the one he had laid on the altar that first day. He took her hand and gently wrapped it around her wrist, the silver cool against her skin. "I cannot offer you peace, mia cara," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely allowed himself. "I cannot offer you a simple life, but I offer you all that I am. My protection, my loyalty, my name. I paid your brother's debt, but I am forever in yours for showing me what is real." Anna looked at the rosary, then up at his face. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, a soft, chaste kiss that sealed their promise. It was not a wedding, but a sacrament of its own, a binding of his darkness to her light. They walked out of the church together, hand in hand, leaving the shadows of the sanctuary for the rain-slicked, neon-lit streets of their city.